Now, it's fair to say that horror, perhaps more so than any other genre of media, benefits from what is not shown to viewers, of hiding terrifying threats in the shadows and, crucially, not making the production's visual effects limitations clear. There's a lot to be said for restraint, for only periodically showing the terror, because what with the nature of digital media these days, it's all too easy for audiences to hit the pause button and take a long, lingering look at an effect that doesn't stand up to prolonged scrutiny. But these 10 horror TV shows, each with their own devoted fan bases and many of them acclaimed classics, dared to offer up moments that absolutely should never ever be paused, from unconvincing CGI to atrociously obvious body doubles and, yes, an Easter egg hunt so terrifying that you really shouldn't bother. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror TV shows you must never pause. Number 10. Terrible CGI everywhere. The Walking Dead. Despite being one of the most popular TV shows of the last decade plus, with episodes being budgeted at several $1 million each, it is shocking just how persistently terrible The Walking Dead's visual effects are. Hell, there are even enough hideous CGI blunders in this show that we even wrote a list on it, with by far the most infamous VFX gaffe being an embarrassingly lo-fi digital deer that shows up in the series' 7th season. This is just one of several instances of egregiously poor CGI throughout the show. There's the digital CDC building explosion, Michonne walking past burning mattresses that were created in post, and the awful green screen shot of Rick standing in front of a landfill. Not to mention the general overabundance of unconvincing CGI blood throughout the show. Basically, never pause anything in this show to get a better look, because there's a good chance that it will reveal just how shamelessly AMC cut corners in order to save a little money. Yikes. Number 9. The Leviathans. Supernatural. For the standards of a CW show, Supernatural boasts relatively solid production values, but there's no escaping how absolutely horrid and not in the intended way the Leviathans look. The man-eating shapeshifters typically reveal their true nature when their human faces transform into a gaping maw of jagged teeth complete with a forked tongue. It's a terrifying idea in theory, but the VFX are so uniformly cheap that they end up resembling goofy B-movie villains rather than cosmic nightmare fuel. It's easy to believe that these effects are the result of interns at the effects house being given a Friday afternoon to motion track a lo-fi 3D animation onto an actor's face. Worse still, they all looked terrible even a decade ago when these episodes originally aired. Any small measure of fear that the Leviathans still hold in your heart will surely evaporate if you dare to pause any of their so-called money shots. Number 8. Mike's hairy-legged stunt double, Stranger Things. Now, Stranger Things is undeniably one of the most popular shows that is currently on the air, and while you might be tempted to hit the pause button in order to savor the series' outstanding production design and lavish VFX, be careful where you decide to freeze frame. One of the show's most cited criticisms throughout the 3rd and 4th seasons has been the distractingly accelerated ages of the main cast, basically an unavoidable consequence of the show's lengthy production and, of course, the pandemic further slowing shooting. But even with the cast visibly growing up across seasons, the show's crew were a little optimistic in assuming that fans wouldn't notice the very obvious adult stunt doubles that are subbing in for the younger protagonists. In Season 3's final episode, The Battle of Starcourt, a Mind Flayer-possessed Billy attacks the Hawkins gang, throwing Mike into a wall and causing him to fall to the floor in pain. As noticed by Redditor Major Threat on the R-Movie Mistakes thread, for a fleeting shot, it is hilariously obvious that we're not looking at Finn Wolfhard. You see, Mike's legs have suddenly sprouted a wealth of hair that you'd expect from a full-grown adult male, not somebody who was just 16 years of age during shooting, and certainly not Wolfhard, whose legs are clearly shown to be relatively hairless whenever he's wearing shorts. It doesn't break the show by any means, but it is an amusing reminder of the challenges of working with a predominantly young ensemble cast. Number 7. The terrible fake dog prop, Bates Motel. Now, here is a moment that should be absolutely heartbreaking, and yet, if you pay remote close attention, it becomes completely impossible to take seriously. In the 7th episode of Bates Motel's 1st season, Norman befriends a stray dog, Juno, and after calling out to it across the road, the dog is struck and killed by a truck as it attempts to cross the road. Horrible and devastating, right? Except if you keep an eye on poor old Juno at the moment of impact, it's very clearly a cheap ragdoll, given that its small body just tumbles stiffly underneath the truck rather than, well, squishing like you'd expect from a flesh and blood animal. It shouldn't be funny, but the obviousness of this prop, even when it's out of focus as it is, totally obliterates the emotional intent of the scene, and in a feat of accidental irony, Norman then has the dead dog stuffed, so the late canine now has all the rigidity of the fake dog used to achieve her demise on the screen. Classic. Number 6. Harrison's adult stunt double, Dexter. Many Dexter fans had basically lost all hope for the series as it entered its miserable 8th season, and of the many terrible moments fans care not to remember, there's a ridiculous treadmill accident that befalls Dexter's young son Harrison a few episodes from the end. While Hannah is babysitting Harrison, he decides to toy around with a treadmill and, predictably, ends up tripping and smashing his chin. It's a silly scene in of itself, albeit one made so much worse by the fact that Harrison's fall is very clearly carried out by a fully grown adult trying to fall and resemble a small injured child. There are 2 shots in particular where the deception is hilariously obvious, that we're looking at a stuntman several times larger than the actor in question, and the man is seemingly wearing a blonde mop of a wig in a feckless attempt to sell the illusion. It's hardly the worst thing in season 8, and certainly not the most infuriating, but an absolute embarrassment from a show that is generally so slickly produced elsewhere. Number 5. The unsettlingly terrible effects. Twin Peaks: The Return. Twin Peaks: The Return is one of the most unforgettable TV series of the last decade, a long-awaited follow-up to the legendary series that is as baffling as it is brilliant. One of the series' most divisive aspects remains its visual effects, which range from utterly mesmerizing, namely Episode 8's stunning nuclear explosion, to absolutely hideous. While some of Lynch's fans continue to argue that the low-poly, poorly textured effects were intentional, it's much easier to believe that Lynch simply lacked the budget to execute all of his ideas at a high level of fidelity, and decided instead to save the big bucks, so many of the effects wouldn't look amiss in grotty VHS tape and lo-fi video games from literally decades ago. And while the visual effects are certainly interesting, sometimes the results are so off-puttingly garish as to make The Return a genuine eyesore. Again, there are those who maintain that this was entirely on purpose by Lynch to subvert our very expectations of prestige TV with a nauseating aesthetic, but either way, you're probably better off not scrutinizing them too much for fear of seeing just how rudimentary and ugly they truly are. Number 4. The Hidden Ghosts, The Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor. And now for something that isn't a horrible VFX gaffe or unconvincing stunt double. Mike Flanagan's sister horror series The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor were notable for many reasons, not least that Flanagan made the decision to sneakily include ghostly figures throughout each series. Fans and critics found literally dozens of ghosts cleverly concealed in plain sight throughout almost every episode of each show. Some are hidden within negative space that the viewer's eye wouldn't naturally be drawn towards, while others are disguised as general household objects, and there are even those that are only visible if you crank the brightness settings up on your TV to the extreme. As much as it might seem like a fun game to try and catch 'em all Pokemon style, for your psyche's sake it's probably best not to, because some of them are sure to give grown adults vivid nightmares. Number 3. Anna's Unhinged Jaw, V, 2009. The 2009 reboot of legendary 1980s sci-fi horror miniseries V received wildly mixed reviews across its 2-season run, with the one key complaint being its drastically low budget, defined by cheap sets and low-rent visual effects which failed to live up to the original show. This was most palpably felt during the reboot series' attempt to recreate the iconic scene from the 80s show where villainous alien Queen Diana unhinges her jaw and eats a live rat. Now, the original prosthetic effects certainly didn't look great, and there was clearly a ripe opportunity here to massively improve upon it with contemporary VFX, and yet when Diana's daughter Anna chows down on some squirming vermin, it somehow looks even worse. Rather than using a practical prosthetic, Anna's unhinged jaw and widely extended mouth were achieved digitally, except that it looks like ABC spent about $5 on an After Effects plugin to pull it off. More comical than disturbing, the shot of Anna dropping the terrified animal into a gaping maw looks like something out of a bad 90s FMV video game rather than from a scene from a TV show that aired on a major network barely a decade ago. TV shows are famously produced on tight deadlines with limited VFX budgets, but come on, people can literally produce more convincing effects on their home computers these days. Number 2. Peter's Transformation, Hemlock Grove. Alright, I know this one might ruffle some feathers, but let's get into it. Hemlock Grove does admittedly deserve a measure of credit for combining CGI with practical effects for the physical transformations of werewolf Peter, yet it's also painfully clear watching these scenes that Netflix was a little tight with their VFX purse strings. Now, the idea behind Peter's transformation of his wolf form tearing out of his human body is really quite fantastic, but the execution is far more middling due to CGI that felt poorly dated back when it originally aired almost a decade ago. Now, the biggest issues are the hilariously bad motion tracking of the CGI yellow eyes over the actor's actual eyes, atrocious looking digital werewolf fingernails protruding from his human fingers, and embarrassingly low poly tears on his back as the transformation continues. The money shot of the werewolf's face bursting through Peter's own, now that looks pretty great, but everything else is hugely on the rough side, and it doesn't at all hold up to the scrutiny of a freeze frame. And number 1, another terrible CGI deer, American Horror Story Apocalypse. Proving that The Walking Dead didn't solely corner the market on awful CGI deer, American Horror Story Apocalypse offered up its own shockingly naff digital doe in the season's 5th episode, Boy Wonder. Near the start of the episode, Mallory uses her extensive powers to not only heal a dead deer's wounds, but also restore its youth. It's a swell idea, but a complex effect for even a well-minted TV show to pull off, and so it's not terribly surprising that they bungled it. The morphing effect from the adult to youthful deer looks, to be kind, like something out of a PS2 game and doesn't hold up to even the most casual degree of challenge. The effect was widely mocked by fans when the episode first aired back in 2018, roughly 18 months after The Walking Dead first introduced audiences to the deeply off-putting horrors of what CGI deers could be. And there we go, my friends, those were 10 horror TV shows that you must never ever pause. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules, and you can follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, or the same on Instagram, RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Even though we talked today about horror TV shows you must never pause, I definitely encourage you to take a pause every once in a while in your regular lives, just so that you can get a bit of perspective and rest and relax, because that is how you live a healthy and happy life. By getting a bit of perspective, you can see where your limitations are, where you need to ask for help, and sometimes when options just aren't right for you and you need to try something else. It's all part of growth, and as difficult as it is sometimes, it's very healthy to take your foot off the gas and just enjoy the view for a bit. Big love to you, my friend. Hope you're treating yourself well. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.